The wind howled through the cracked window of Ethan Carver's one-bedroom apartment, carrying the bitter chill of a late November evening in Toledo, Ohio. The radiator clanked uselessly, spitting out bursts of lukewarm air that did little to warm the room. Ethan, 34, sat hunched over a wobbly kitchen table, his calloused hands cradling a chipped mug of instant coffee. The faint aroma of burnt grounds mingled with the musty scent of damp drywall. His flannel shirt hung loose. On his lean frame, the sleeves frayed from years of wear. In the dim glow of a single bulb, his hazel eyes scanned a stack of overdue bills: electric, gas, rent, each stamped with red ink that screamed, "Final notice." On the couch, his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, slept under a threadbare blanket, her soft snores barely audible over the wind. Her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Flops, lay tucked under her chin, its once white fur now a dingy gray. Ethan's chest tightened as he watched her. She deserved better: a warm bed, a full belly, a father who wasn't drowning. But the factory layoffs had hit hard, and his part-time gig at the gas station barely covered diapers, let alone dreams. He rubbed his stubbled jaw, the weight of failure pressing down like a physical force. A sharp knock at the door jolted him upright. He glanced at the clock. 8:47 p.m. Who the hell would be knocking this late? He hesitated, then shuffled to the door, peering through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, her face half hidden by a tattered scarf. Behind her, 3 small figures huddled close, their coats too thin for the cold. Ethan's first instinct was to ignore them. Strangers meant trouble, but something in the woman's posture, the way her shoulders sagged, stopped him. He cracked the door open, the chain lock still in place. "Can I help you?" His voice was gruff, guarded. The woman lifted her head, revealing tired brown eyes and chapped lips. She couldn't have been older than 30, but her face carried the wear of someone twice her age. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm Mara. These are my kids, Jaden, Kyla, and Timmy. We haven't eaten since yesterday. I saw your light on. I thought maybe." She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. Ethan's stomach twisted. He glanced at the kids. The oldest, Jaden, maybe 10, stared at him with wary eyes, his arms crossed tightly. Kyla, around Lily's age, clutched a plastic grocery bag that looked empty. Timmy, the youngest, no more than 4, shivered violently, his nose red and runny. Ethan's mind raced. He barely had enough for him and Lily: a half loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, some canned beans. But the desperation in Mara's voice clawed at him. "Hold on," he muttered, closing the door just enough to unlatch the chain. He opened it wider, stepping aside. "Come in. It's freezing out there." Mara hesitated, then ushered her kids inside. The apartment felt smaller with them in it, their presence filling the cramped space with a nervous energy. The kids stood, close to their mother, eyeing Ethan like he might bite. He gestured to the couch where Lily still slept. "You can sit. I'll see what I got." Mara nodded, her scarf slipping to reveal a bruise on her cheek, faint but unmistakable. Ethan's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, turning to the kitchen instead. He rummaged through the cabinets, the clatter of tin cans echoing in the quiet. Behind him, he heard Mara whisper to her kids, "Stay still. Don't touch anything." He returned with a plate of peanut butter sandwiches, cut into uneven triangles, and a can of beans he'd warmed on the stove. The smell of the beans, earthy and slightly sweet, filled the room. "It's not much," he said, setting the food on the table, "but it's what I got." Mara's eyes welled up. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. She divided the sandwiches among her kids, giving each a small portion of beans. Jaden ate slowly, watching Ethan. Kyla tore into her sandwich, crumbs falling onto her lap. Timmy giggled as he licked peanut butter off his fingers, the sound bright and jarring in the heavy silence. Ethan leaned against the counter, sipping his cold coffee. "You from around here?" he asked, trying to fill the awkwardness. Mara shook her head, wiping Timmy's face with her sleeve. "We were in Detroit. My husband. He wasn't good to us. I took the kids and left 3 weeks ago. Been moving. South trying to find work. We're staying at a shelter downtown, but they ran out of food tonight." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He knew what it was like to run. From debt, from mistakes, from a life that kept kicking you down. After his wife Sarah died in a car accident 2 years ago, he'd packed up Lily and moved here hoping for a fresh start, but grief and bills followed like shadows. "You got family to help?" he asked. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not anymore." She didn't elaborate, and Ethan didn't push. Lily stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open. She sat up, clutching Mr. Flops, and stared at the strangers. "Daddy?" she said, her voice small. "It's okay, Bug," Ethan said, crossing to her. "These are friends. They're just eating." Lily's gaze landed on Kyla, who was still nibbling her sandwich. Without a word, Lily slid off the couch and padded to the table, her bare feet silent on the linoleum. She held out Mr. Flops. "You can hold him if you want," she said to Kyla. Kyla froze, then took the rabbit, her fingers brushing Lily's. "Thanks," she mumbled, a shy smile breaking through. Ethan's heart ached. Lily had so little, yet here she was, giving. He caught Mara's eye, and for a moment they shared a look. Two parents carrying the same weight, the same fear, failing their kids. The night stretched on, the wind rattling the windows. Mara told Ethan about her old job as a nurse's aide, how she'd loved it until her husband's drinking spiraled. Ethan shared bits of his own story, Sarah's accident, the factory closing, the endless grind of making ends meet. The kids, warmed by the food and each other's company, started to relax. Jaden even laughed when Timmy smeared peanut butter on his own nose. But the ease shattered when a loud bang came from the hallway, followed by shouting. Ethan tensed, his hand instinctively going to Lily. Mara grabbed her kids, pulling them close. "What was that?" she whispered. "Stay here," Ethan said, his voice low. He grabbed a baseball bat from the corner, kept for nights like this, and crept to the door. Through the peephole, he saw two men in the hallway, one pounding on a neighbor's door. Their voices were slurred, angry. Ethan's pulse raced. He recognized one of them, Ricky, a lowlife who hung around the gas station, always looking for trouble. He turned back to Mara, whose face was pale. "It's just some drunks, they'll move on." But his words felt hollow. The shouting grew louder, and then, crash, a door splintered somewhere down the hall. Lily whimpered, and Mara's kids clung to her. Ethan's mind spun. He couldn't fight off two guys, not with kids to protect. But if Ricky and his buddy came here, he gripped the bat tighter, his knuckles white. Then Mara stood, her jaw set. "I know how to handle guys like that," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "My husband was worse." She moved to the door, motioning for Ethan to stay back. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Trust me," she said. She opened the door just enough to lean out. "Hey," she called, her voice sharp but calm. "You looking for something?" The shouting stopped. Ethan peered over her shoulder, his heart pounding. Ricky turned, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "Who the hell are you?" he slurred. "Someone who doesn't want trouble," Mara said. "But I got a phone, and I'm real good at dialing 911. You want cops crawling all over this place?" Ricky laughed, but it was unsteady. His buddy muttered something, tugging his arm. Mara didn't flinch, her gaze locked on them. "Go sleep it off," she said. "Now." For a tense moment, Ethan thought Ricky would lunge. But then he spat on the floor and stumbled away, his buddy following. Mara closed the door, her hands shaking as she locked it. Ethan stared at her, his breath uneven. "That was insane," Mara shrugged, but her eyes were haunted. You learn to bluff when you've got no choice. The adrenaline faded, leaving a heavy silence. Ethan put the bat down, his hands still trembling. Lily ran to him and he scooped her up, holding her tight. Mara gathered her kids, whispering reassurances. But the fear lingered, a reminder of how close things had come to breaking. The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of pancakes. He blinked, disoriented, and found Mara in the kitchen, flipping batter on a griddle he hadn't used in months. The kids were at the table, giggling as they drew on scraps of paper. Mara looked up, a faint smile on her face. "Found some mix in your cupboard," she said. "Hope you don't mind." Ethan shook his head, stunned. "Where'd you get the energy?" "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Figured I'd do something useful." They ate together, the pancakes warm and slightly sweet, a small miracle in a world of scarcity. Ethan watched Lily and Kyla trade drawings, their laughter filling the room. Jaden even joined in, showing Timmy how to draw a dog. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. But the moment was fleeting. Mara's face grew serious as she cleaned the plates. "We can't stay," she said quietly. "The shelter's got rules and I need to find work." Ethan nodded, though his chest ached. He wanted to help, but what could he offer? He barely had enough for Lily. Still, he couldn't shake the image of Mara facing down Ricky, or the way her kids had smiled over pancakes. "Let me make some calls," he said. "I know a guy at the community center. They've got job programs, maybe a place for you and the kids." Mara's eyes softened. "You don't have to. I want to," he cut in. "You didn't have to stand up to those guys last night." "But you did." She held his gaze, then nodded. "Okay." The next few days were a blur. Ethan called his old friend Mike, who ran a job training program at the community center. Mike was skeptical. Resources were tight, but Ethan pushed, telling him about Mara's courage, her kids' resilience. Meanwhile, Mara helped Ethan organize his bills, her nurse's aide efficiency cutting through his chaos. She even patched a hole in Lily's coat with a needle and thread from her bag. But the twist came on the third day when Mike called back. "Ethan, I ran Mara's name through our system," he said, his voice tense. "She's got a warrant out, shoplifting from a year ago in Detroit. If she applies for aid, they'll arrest her." Ethan's stomach dropped. He looked at Mara, who was helping Lily with a puzzle. She didn't know. He thanked Mike and hung up, his mind reeling. Shoplifting? It didn't fit the woman he'd seen, the one who'd risked herself to protect them. But desperation made people do things. He knew that too well. He could turn her in. It'd be easy. Call the cops, wash his hands of it, but the thought made him sick. Mara wasn't a criminal. She was a mother, fighting for her kids, like he was. That night, he sat her down after the kids were asleep. "Mara," he said, his voice low, "I know about the warrant." Her face went white. "How? Doesn't matter. Why didn't you tell me?" Tears filled her eyes. "It was baby formula," she whispered. "Timmy was starving and my husband spent our last dime on whiskey. I didn't know what else to do." Ethan's throat tightened. He saw Lily in his mind, hungry, crying. What wouldn't he do for her? "I'm not turning you in," he said, "but you need to clear this up. You can't keep running." Mara nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know, I'm scared." He reached across the table, hesitating, then took her hand. "You're not alone." The next morning, Ethan drove Mara to the courthouse, the kids, in the back seat of his rusty pickup. Lily and Kyla sang a made-up song, their voices bright against the gray sky. Ethan had called a legal aid lawyer Mike recommended, who agreed to take Mara's case pro bono. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start. As they waited in the courthouse, Ethan watched the kids play. Jaden was teaching Lily how to make a paper airplane. His usual wariness softened. Timmy clung to Mara, but even he seemed lighter, giggling, when Kyla tickled him. Ethan realized he hadn't seen Lily this happy in months. The lawyer came through. The judge, moved by Mara's story and her clean record since, reduced the charge to a fine. Ethan didn't have much, but he paid it, using the last of his gas station paycheck. Mara tried to protest, but he shook his head. You'd have done the same. When they stepped outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the city. Mara hugged Ethan, her tears soaking his shirt. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You already did, he said, glancing at Lily, who was laughing with Kyla. You gave her a friend. Mike came through with a job lead, a hospital janitor position for Mara, with benefits. It wasn't her old nursing gig, but it was steady, enough to get her and the kids into subsidized housing. Ethan helped them move, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs, his muscles aching but his heart full. On their last night in the apartment, Mara cooked dinner, spaghetti with sauce from a food pantry, the smell rich and comforting. The kids set the table, their chatter filling the room. Ethan looked around at Lily's smile, at Mara's quiet strength, at the way Jaden helped Timmy with his fork. It wasn't perfect. The bills still loomed, and the future was uncertain. But for the first time, Ethan felt like he wasn't alone. They cleaned up. Mara handed him a folded piece of paper. Kyla drew this, she said. Ethan opened it. It was a crayon drawing of 2 houses, side by side, with stick figures labeled Lily and Kyla holding hands. Above them, a bright yellow sun shone. She wants you to keep it, Mara said. Ethan's eyes stung. He tucked the drawing into his pocket, his fingers brushing the worn leather of his wallet. Tell her I will. That night, after Mara and the kids left for their new place, Ethan sat on the couch, Lily asleep beside him. He pulled out the drawing, tracing the lines with his finger. The wind still howled outside, but the room felt warmer, the shadows less heavy. Kindness, he realized, wasn't just a moment. It was a spark, small but fierce, that could light up the darkest places. And in a world that tried to break you, that spark was everything.